Welcome to your custom deep dive. I'm so glad you're joining us today because, well, we have a truly compelling and honestly quite dark stack of research to get through.
Yeah, it is definitely on the darker side, the
For
path,
sure. For this deep dive, our mission is to explore the ethically complex and frankly incredibly grim history of the early internet.
right?
And we are doing this by unpacking a single, deeply detailed Wikipedia source. It covers the rise, the various controversies, and the ultimate fall of a Canadian shock site known as Best Gore.
And right off the bat, because of the nature of the source material you've provided, we are going to be discussing the existence of some highly disturbing content today.
Yeah, viewer or listener discretion is advised, for
Yeah,
sure.
exactly. But the reason we're exploring this isn't for some morbid history lesson. It's a really profound look at the Wild West days of the web.
hmm
It forces us to ask how society decides what information is simply too dangerous to view. Where the legal line of obscenity is actually drawn.
And what happens when those boundaries are pushed to their absolute breaking point? We are looking at how a website that intentionally hosted the internet's most gruesome content ended up sparking a massive national legal battle.
A battle over morality, freedom of information, and the very definition of internet censorship.
Okay, let's unpack this. We need to start with the anatomy of this site and the bizarre economics of running it. Best Gore was launched on April 30th, 2008.
Right.
The site was owned and operated by a man named Mark Merrick, and it stayed active all the way until November 2020.
Which is wild. 12 years is an absolute eternity in internet time,
Yeah.
especially for a site operating on the extreme fringes.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have to remember what the internet landscape looked like back in 2008. We didn't have the heavily sanitized, algorithmic social media feeds we have today. The web was still very much a frontier.
And the content on this particular frontier was exactly what you would expect from the term shock site, but taken to the absolute limit.
Yeah, they didn't hold back.
Not at all. We're talking about photos and videos of murders, suicides, torture, and mutilations. They hosted unedited footage of open surgeries, horrific traffic collisions, and even live assassinations.
Just incredibly graphic stuff.
And beyond the physical violence, the site also hosted leaked government documents and raw files from the CIA and the FBI. It was essentially this repository for things you were never supposed to see.
You would think, given the dark voyeuristic nature of human curiosity, that a site offering such forbidden content would be highly lucrative.
Right, you'd assume he was making a fortune.
But this is where the mundane reality of the internet collides with the fringes of content hosting. Running a website with massive amounts of high-bandwidth video traffic costs a fortune.
Oh, the server costs alone.
Exactly. You have server costs, constant maintenance, exorbitant bandwidth fees. In a 2017 interview with GQ Australia, Mark Merrick actually admitted that running Best Gore cost more than it generated in revenue.
Wait, so if he's paying those exorbitant server costs out of pocket and basically losing money for 12 years, why keep doing it? Was it purely ideological for him?
It seems to be this mix of intense ideological commitment and just a total inability to monetize the traffic. It really reveals the hidden architecture of the internet ecosystem.
How so?
Well, we often think of these extreme shock sites as lawless spaces,
Right.
existing completely outside the rules of normal society. But ultimately, even the darkest corners of the web are bound by the incredibly mundane realities of ad revenue.
Oh, right. Advertisers.
Yeah, you can host the most shocking content on earth, but if a mid-level marketing executive at a mattress company won't put a banner ad next to it, your site is going to bleed money.
Merrick actually had a very telling quote about that specific ad revenue irony. He said, and I'm quoting here, "No company with a reasonable budget would want to advertise on a website that exposes police brutality, government abuse of citizens, war profiteering, and similar anti-people activities." He goes on to say, "So all I'm left with is porn. Worse yet, porn earns less today than it did 5 years ago."
It grounds the whole operation in this weird, bureaucratic reality. The modern internet is largely sanitized by corporate interests. Best Gore was a massive, highly trafficked anomaly that simply couldn't survive the corporate ad model.
But despite those financial struggles, the site continued. And then, in June 2012, it hit a major inflection point.
A huge one.
This was the catalyst that brought Best Gore from the dark corners of the web right into the glaring spotlight of mainstream media and international law enforcement. The site gained massive attention for hosting a graphic video titled "One Lunatic, One Ice Pick."
This was a highly publicized, deeply disturbing case. The video depicted the actual murder, rape, and dismemberment of an international student named Jun Lin, committed by a man named Luca Magnotta.
And we should clarify the terms here.
Right, just to be technically precise about the terminology, while some media might loosely call something like that a snuff film, legally and technically, a snuff film implies a murder committed specifically for commercial financial gain.
Which this wasn't.
No, this was a recorded murder uploaded for notoriety. And when this video surfaced on Best Gore, the public outcry was immediate and intense.
Almost immediately, we get these wildly clashing narratives about how the site handled the video. According to the police, Mark Merrick initially refused their request to remove the horrific footage from the website.
But Merrick vehemently denied that version of events.
Yeah, he was very specific in his denial.
He was. Merrick stated that he took it down himself, on his own terms, without being asked. He went on to say that if the police had made a request, as they alleged, he would have simply told them that the video had already been down for days.
So you have a direct, unresolvable contradiction between law enforcement and the site operator regarding the timeline and the intent behind removing the video.
Which brings up the crucial legal threshold of all this. It's one thing to have a platform where users might upload terrible things independently. It's another thing entirely once the platform owner knows it's there.
Exactly. The source brings in the perspective of a Toronto-based lawyer specializing in internet law named Gilles Valloni.
What did he say?
He argued that the evidence absolutely supported the laying of obscenity charges against Best Gore. Zavononi stated, "There's no real crime where there's no knowledge, but once they got notice of that and they allowed it to stay on there, that's when the legal line is crossed."
It's the critical debate of active hosting versus passive platforming. The internet largely relies on safe harbor laws, the idea that a platform isn't responsible for what a user posts, as long as the platform acts to remove illegal content once they are made aware of it.
Right, like YouTube or Reddit taking down flag posts.
Exactly. The legal argument against Merrick hinges on that exact moment of awareness. Once the operator is aware that a recorded murder is actively being hosted and viewed on their servers, any delay in taking it down transforms the site from a neutral host into an active distributor of obscene material.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though, because you would think the defense for running a site like this would just be a strict First Amendment-style freedom of speech argument.
Yeah, the classic internet should be completely unregulated stance.
Right. But Mark Merrick's defense of his website was far more bizarre and honestly a complex psychological claim. He argued a public service defense.
He essentially claimed that Best Gore served a positive, necessary function for society. To explain this, Merrick used a really striking analogy. He compared the extremely gory, horrific videos on his website to the graphic images that the Canadian government mandates be printed on cigarette packaging to deter people from smoking.
The logic being that if you see the horrific physical consequences of an action in vivid detail, you will avoid that action.
Precisely.
And Merrick actually tried to back this up with testimonies from his readers. He said he regularly received positive feedback about how watching this horrific content saved lives.
Really, save lives.
That's what he claimed. Users allegedly told him that viewing these tragic accidents and violent outcomes convinced them to avoid everyday risks. He specifically cited things like speeding, darting between traffic on a motorcycle, and even horseplay with forklifts.
Wow.
He even went so far as to claim that the site had persuaded some individuals not to commit suicide.
What's fascinating here is it prompts you, as the listener, to really think critically about human nature. He's presenting exposure to raw trauma as a form of extreme aversion therapy for the general public.
Like staring at a car crash.
Exactly. We all know the phenomenon of rubbernecking at a car crash. There is a dark human impulse to look at disaster. Merrick was arguing that satisfying that impulse makes us safer.
Does it, though?
That's the debate. Does witnessing the absolute worst-case scenario, the unedited, brutal reality of a workplace accident, actually act as a deterrent to risky behavior? Or does indiscriminate exposure to that level of graphic violence simply traumatize and desensitize the viewer?
I have to imagine most psychologists would lean toward the latter. And unsurprisingly, the police did not buy the public service argument either. The legal hammer eventually fell.
It was only a matter of time.
Following the investigation by the Montreal police into the Magnotta video, Mark Merrick was officially charged by Edmonton police on July 16, 2013. And the specific charge is what makes this case so historically significant.
Because it wasn't just a generic internet crime.
No, he was hit with a highly unusual charge under Section 163 of the Canadian Criminal Code. The charge was corrupting morals.
Corrupting morals. It's a phrase that sounds like it belongs in the 19th century, not the digital age.
Very Victorian.
Yeah. It's an incredibly rare charge, carrying a maximum sentence of 2 years in prison. And the language used by the authorities really highlights how they viewed the site. One police investigator didn't just call it a hub for violence. They described Best Gore as a racist website, inciting hate, hatred, violence above and beyond anything normal.
So the authorities are painting a picture of a site that isn't just a neutral repository for morbid reality, but an active engine for societal degradation.
Right.
The legal saga that followed was messy. Merrick was initially released on bail, but then just 10 days later, on July 26th, he was rearrested for allegedly violating the terms of his release. This dragged on for years.
Years of legal back and forth.
Until finally, in January 2016, Merrick pleaded guilty. He received a conditional sentence of 3 months of house arrest, followed by 3 months of community service.
A seemingly light sentence after such a rare and heavy charge. But Merrick didn't just quietly accept the premise of the corrupting morals law. In a November 2013 interview with Adrienne Jeffries of The Verge, he aggressively pushed back against the charge itself, arguing that Section 163 was wildly antiquated.
He actually made a great point about the history of the law. Merrick pointed out that Section 163 originally prohibited the distribution of crime comics and methods of curing venereal disease.
Just think about the absurdity of that for a second. The legal system is trying to regulate a 21st century digital shock site streaming global, unedited violence, and the only tool they have is a law originally written to stop teenagers from buying vintage crime comics or pamphlets about medical cures in the 1950s.
It's crazy when you put it that way.
It perfectly illustrates how analog laws are often blunt, ineffective instruments when trying to police digital ghosts.
Because of that outdated origin, Merrick argued the law was being enforced selectively. He felt it could be used indiscriminately against anyone the government simply decided they didn't like.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, Merrick was constructing a narrative that Best Gore wasn't a corrupting influence at all, but rather an essential tool for unvarnished truth. And this brings us to his most complex and arguably most controversial defense.
Okay, I'm ready.
He claimed that his community of users, people who were drawn together by a shared morbid curiosity, had actually evolved into an elite, crowdsourced anti-propaganda unit.
Now, to be completely clear here, we aren't validating Merrick's geopolitics or independently verifying these global claims. We're just looking at the defense he built to justify his site's existence to the public.
Exactly. We are looking purely at the mechanism he claimed was happening on his site. Merrick argued that because his users consumed so much raw, unedited footage of global violence and accidents, they had developed an encyclopedic visual memory of tragedy.
They remembered everything they watched.
Right. So when governments or rebel groups would try to repurpose old footage to push a new political narrative, the Best Gore community would instantly recognize it and debunk it.
There are 3 very specific, detailed examples that Merrick gave to prove this point, and the geopolitical irony in them is wild. The first involves a brutal chainsaw beheading video.
Okay.
According to Merrick, a Syrian rebel propaganda team circulated this video, claiming the atrocity was committed by people behind Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. But Merrick said his users weren't fooled for a second.
They recognized it.
Yes. They knew the video was actually much older, that they had the full version with original audio, and that it was actually footage of Sinaloa cartel members in Mexico.
So footage of cartel violence in North America was allegedly being repackaged to influence international perception of a Middle Eastern civil war. And this fringe shock site community caught the lie because they had already scrutinized the original video years prior.
Exactly. The second example Merrick provided was a video of a domestic gas leak explosion. He claimed this footage was maliciously manipulated and circulated to look like the aftermath of indiscriminate bombings by ruling powers.
And let me guess, the users caught it again.
Yep. Again, he says his community recognized the original context of the gas leak and busted the propaganda attempt.
The third example is perhaps the most complex of all. Merrick claimed that a narrative was spreading globally about Muslims being slaughtered by Buddhists in Burma, which is now Myanmar. He stated that the video evidence being used to fool the world was actually a heavily manipulated mashup.
A mashup?
Yeah. According to Merrick, his users dissected the video frame by frame and identified that it was stitched together from 3 entirely unrelated events.
The specifics of that mashup are staggering. They identified a lynching video from Kenya, footage of an earthquake in Tibet, and video of the tsunami disaster in Thailand.
The claim is that they deconstructed a fake narrative by identifying a Kenyan lynching, a Tibetan earthquake, and a Thai tsunami, all spliced together to look like religious violence in Burma.
So what does this all mean? We have a website built on the darkest impulses of human curiosity, a site that police called an engine of hatred.
It creates a profound paradox. You have a community of people colloquially known as gorehounds individuals who spend their free time watching the most horrific things imaginable, yet, according to Merrick, this exact habit inadvertently turned them into incredibly effective forensic analysts.
Because they had seen it all before.
Because they had seen the raw source material of human misery, they were uniquely inoculated against visual manipulation. They could spot a geopolitical lie because they recognized the specific background details from a cartel video 5 years prior.
It's a total inversion of the corrupting morals charge. He's essentially saying, we aren't corrupted, we're the only ones seeing clearly because we refuse to look away.
Right.
But ultimately, the era of Best Gore did come to an end. Interestingly, the site didn't fall to a massive government takedown in the end. The source material tells us that on November 15th, 2020, the website simply became defunct. Mark Merrick had decided to focus his attention on other interests.
You just walked away.
Yeah. A few days later, on an alternative, decentralized video platform called lbarry.tv, someone asked if the site was down indefinitely. Merrick simply replied, most likely permanently.
It ended not with a bang, but with a quiet server shutdown. A mundane end to a highly controversial digital era.
Which leaves us with the core tension we've been circling this entire deep dive. Best Gore existed right on the bleeding edge of the debate between public morality, freedom of information, the legal responsibilities of hosting platforms, and the dark psychological draw of human tragedy.
This raises an important question, and it's the thought we want to leave you with today.
Yeah.
We've just analyzed how this deeply controversial shock site community inadvertently acted as a morbid but apparently effective verification system against manipulated videos and propaganda.
Right.
Today, we are living in a rapidly evolving era of AI-generated deepfakes, highly curated algorithmic news feeds, and unprecedented digital manipulation. So who are the modern arbiters of visual truth?
That is the big question.
When the chaotic, unfiltered shock sites of the early internet disappear, do we inadvertently lose an ugly but highly effective crowdsourced fact-checking mechanism? And if so, what takes its place in a world where seeing is no longer believing?
It's a heavy question, and one that only gets more relevant as technology advances. Thank you so much for joining us on this complex and challenging deep dive today. We hope it gave you a new perspective on the hidden mechanics of the internet and the tricky balance between censorship and truth. Keep questioning the world around you, and we will catch you on the next one.